What's up guys, Rowan here from Smart TV. And HSC English can be one of those subjects where it can feel like you can put so much effort in and just not get the results. And today I'm speaking to Hamish, who certainly had that experience during Year 11. He was working hard and getting 70-75% results in HSC Advanced English and was thinking about dropping down to standard. Now, across the course of Year 12, he was able to lift his marks first to a Band 5 in the 80% range, and then eventually crack that Band 6 wall. And today we're going to be looking at what are things that you can do as a student to really lift your results and push past that Band 6 wall so that you can score a 90% plus for HSC Advanced English. So welcome, Hamish.
Hello, Rowan. Thanks very much for having me.
Now, what was happening in Year 11 for you? You know, you were working hard, not getting the results for English. Tell me a little bit more about it.
I think I walked in with that perception of English as one of those subjects where it's just so complex, it's abstract, it's its own sort of breed of a subject. And I kind of got caught in that. I always used to look at something and go, this is just confusing, I don't understand it, this is just ridiculous, because that was my perception walking in. And then when I started doing the assessments, I never really focused too much, annoyingly, on the actual task, what it was actually saying. I was always thinking, let's try and write something that is sophisticated, sounds the best, has the best vocab in it, it just looks Englishy as I used to think of it. But I never really had clarity on what the task was asking. And I kept doing my task, kept thinking, God, these read really well, but the feedback would always be, if it doesn't make sense, because it doesn't answer the question, or, yeah, you've just touched on it, but you should have gone more with that point. So, and same with criteria, I barely looked at the criteria, like where it would say either critically evaluate or do this with precision and flair and things like that. Never took notice of it, just almost put it aside, dismissed it, because I was just thinking, let's just try and create something that's really fancy, it sounds good, and then submit it.
And I feel like that's a pretty common trap, right, that we make for English, because you're right, it's something that you feel the pressure to write in a highly sophisticated way, and you read these essays for students from maybe prior years and you're like, wow, that sounds amazing. Yeah. So the end result of that was, you know, sort of the 70%, 75% range, and so you got to the point that you were thinking of dropping.
Yeah. So at the end of Year 11, at the end of the third term, before I hit into Year 12, we were kind of getting slowly introduced into what Year 12 Advanced English would look like, and we're looking at modernism and things like that, and I just sat at the back of the room like, I'm so out of my depth, like, this is not for me. And afterwards, I went up to my English teacher, I was like, look, miss, I think I'm going to drop. I'm almost certain that I'm going to drop. This is just unbelievably stressful. It is difficult. I'm doing all this work and the marks just aren't here. And I knew what I wanted to achieve in my ATAR goal at the end of the year, and I thought, if I sustain these results, I can't get it.
And you had quite an ambitious ATAR goal, right? So what was the goal that you'd set yourself?
Yep, so my ATAR goal was 95 at the end of Year 12. Anything above it was a huge bonus.
And so as a result, you were really looking at needing close to a Band 6, if not a Band 6, right, from English. Hence the thought, do I drop to standard?
Exactly.
Maybe I can do better there instead. Now, you kept it for some strange reason at that point. What prompted you to keep it despite the way that you were feeling, you know, the overwhelm with, you know, some of the concepts that were being taught and the fact that your results were not where you wanted them to be?
Well, I sat down with my teacher and I was talking to her about what are the expectations, or what are you required to do in the Year 12 Advanced English? We just looked at a bit of a head start onto what the first term would look like, but what does the overall term actually look like? And once I asked her, she sat down with me, went through it, and then actually said, look, if you need help, we'll sit down together one-on-one, let's go through it. So first of all, just reaching out made me go, okay, there is that support network there. And then was also realising, give first term of Year 12 a go. It's not the same as Year 11. Give it a go, see how it is, see how you find that first task, and just persist with it. And also at the same time, I had my friends who were doing quite well and they were offering the help or the support at that point. So when I started kind of weighing up, I thought, yeah, let's persist for that term. I just said, let's give it a term. Don't drop just yet, keep going. And I didn't want to drop because I just didn't like the feeling of going, I couldn't do it. Let's just keep going with it. And then that's how I kind of kept it at that point.
And so it sounds like what's sort of become really important then, from what I'm hearing, is making sure you had a support network. So it sounds like a big consideration was, hey, if I'm going to take this and have a crack at it, are there some support here that can help me navigate it? And it sounds like that certainly was the case. And so my takeout here for other students is, if you're on that cusp of going into Year 12 and thinking about, do I drop or not, firstly, you know, it sounds like having a crack at it for a term has paid huge dividends.
Yep.
So awesome. And secondly, you know, think about, well, what support, school, friends or otherwise, that you can get, pretty much, you know, to sort of ensure that you kick on in a strong way. So you then start that first term. Okay, what happens there? You know, I mean, your marks start to lift.
Yep.
How do you go in that first assessment?
I did pretty well in the first assessment. I think I fell in around 85, 88 mark, somewhere in that ballpark, just below that 90. And that first task, I'm fairly sure, is our related text task. And that's where I kind of thought, okay, we can pick our own text, something I'm actually engaged with, something I'm interested in. And that's kind of where it springboarded. It was on that first assessment.
Okay, amazing. And so what did you do differently for that assessment? You know, clearly, given the fact that, you know, your Year 11 results were a lot poorer than that comparatively.
Yep. First of all, I got clarity on what the task was actually asking. So when I got the assessment task, I didn't have that perception of, it's got to be fancy, it's got to be sophisticated, all that stuff. It was like, let's actually have a look at what it's asking. And it sounds very cliche and simple, but you need to have the clarity on what the task requires. And then I looked at the criteria, and if I didn't understand it, I went straight to my teacher and said, okay, great, that says this, but what does that actually look like? Like, I can understand that it says critically evaluate or do this, but can I have an exemplar essentially, what would that actually look like? And they said, yeah, absolutely. And they got previous tasks or just random tasks that had to critically evaluate or something like that and said, this is how it would look. I'm like, oh, okay, great. And then also when you do like text and human experiences, it was looking at the rubric and going, what does the rubric want from me or want from us? What's the whole purpose and meaning behind it? And once I found that out and then had the clarity on what this assessment should look like, just put them together, started on it. And then I knew I had a pretty good task sitting there. Then that whole thing about like sophisticating the language and all that came in next. Once the guts of it was there, it was a good response, then it was just trying to level it up a little bit.
So to pull out some themes, and I think there's some really important things. One is, and I feel like it's a theme, it's don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, definitely.
It sounds like you were pretty proactive, and certainly your teachers at school are going to be the best place to start. I mean, they're the ones that are ultimately going to mark these assessments as well. So you want to start there. Secondly, it sounds like really paying attention to the criteria in the rubric. I mean, ultimately, that's what you're getting marked on. So if you want to do well, you've got to really make sure. And then finally, and I think it's really interesting to see the flip that happened, you went from trying to hit sophistication first to actually trying to hit it last once you'd build everything else in it, which is really fantastic. So, you know, you start creating a positive springboard as you go into, you know, the sort of the next part of Year 12, which is great, and sort of the preceding and ongoing assessments. Now, I know along the way you started getting some support with Agapi, your Art of Smart tutor as well for English. What prompted you to get that additional support, given that, you know, you were starting to make some really great progress already?
I think I wanted to level up because I was getting that progress, but I thought I want that kind of extra guidance with what I'm doing and that kind of something that I can work one-on-one with to actually support me, because although I had the clarity on that task, there was still things I was struggling with, like I didn't understand or just concept-based. I was like, I still need a little bit of guidance and support with this, because the teachers in the end of the day can only provide so much, and I thought it'd be great to have someone one-on-one to help me do it. So I thought, okay, I want to reach out, I want to get a tutor. And then I knew through Art of Smart, just doing other things, just reading articles, okay, Art of Smart offer the tutors. Okay, that's where I'm going to go. I want to go seek out an English tutor who can work one-on-one with me, focus on what I'm really struggling with, because it's at the same time with teachers, they can only do so much, whereas when you have someone one-on-one, they can go, that's what you're not great at, or that's what you need work on, let's hone in on it, and let's like push that up a little bit more. So that's why I kind of wanted one.
How did the sessions with Agapi help and make a difference for you over the course of the year?
Well, they were fantastic. So we would sit down with the task, and I'd always kind of come in going, oh, I need help with this, I need help with this, I need help with this, and this, and this list would just be ongoing, and she'd be like, stop, let's go through, like, it's all good, let's look at this task. We've got this task at hand, let's go through it, let's interpret it, let's really understand it, because she obviously performed incredibly well in English at the time, knew a few tips and tricks, different things that I just wasn't aware of. And we would sit down and be like, okay, let's just focus on what's required of this task of you to do. And it would be going through like additional guidance of getting the clarity once again. This is what this looks like, and then this is what this means. This is how you do it. Now, here's an idea about how we're going to kind of construct this task. So having that fresh set of eyes too, that was really good, because I said I'd run into every session like, I don't know this, I don't know that, I don't know that. And she was great at calming me down and going, yeah, let's just focus on this one thing at a time, and let's start going through the task together, getting that extra guidance, that support, and that's how they kind of went.
Yeah, amazing. And did it also help from a feedback loop? I mean, because I imagine you said that, I mean, there's the construction part of the task, but there's then trying to, once you've got what you think are the building blocks there, it is then how do you enhance the sophistication and ensure that it's saying something that's going to meet that criteria at the band 6 level. So what sort of work did you guys do on that?
Yeah, because the feedback loop was massive, because it'd be a week turnaround and I would have something ready to go, or I could just email her and say, we got something like this. And she was great in looking at my work and identifying things that I don't know I'm doing wrong because it's my own work. And like one of the things that I always called, and she used to say to me, was the triple whammy, which was 3 adjectives before something. Like the effect is da 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 da, this and this and this. And she's like, nah, get rid of it. Let's look at it's vocab wise. Let's pick one strong word that represents all of that, and it sounds much more solid. It's more succinct, and it'd be like, okay, here's this big chunk of paragraph. Let's condense it. Let's make it more succinct. Let's get the flow going with it, because that's in that way. If you flow it like this, you'll hit that syllabus point, or so that criteria point. If we rephrase this to look like this, we've then got that point done. If we then fix that up, and because it was such a quick feedback loop, it accelerated and like expedited the process of improving that. It wasn't like you had to wait a few weeks to fix one thing up. It was like, it was getting done really, really quick. And it was just so handy just being able to go, because she understood what the criteria was saying, a lot of the tasks, and then it would be like, let's match up what we're doing here, right? Tick that off, tick that off, tick that off, and that's why it was fantastic.
So it's very systematic, really.
It was, yeah, definitely.
From what I'm hearing now. Across the course of year 12, you know, you end up scoring a band 6, which is fantastic. So, you know, you were able to really push past and get into that. Particularly, you were also grappling with a new syllabus at play as well, which is challenging. So I'd love to get your perspective and advice and tips for students then on, you know, what were the things that you feel are critical for students to do to really break through that band 6 wall for HSC Advanced English?
I think it all comes down to really understanding, having a really solid and clear interpretation of the rubric and the criteria, because at the end of the day, that's what they're looking on. You could have the most sophisticated language, you could have the longest piece of writing, but if it doesn't reflect those 2 sections, then it's not worth much. Whereas someone who has those 2 sections is going to probably perform better, even if it's lower quality in the sophistication and all that. So it's doing as much as you can at the beginning of each topic, of interpreting what that is. And that could be, you read obviously yourself, and then you might seek out a teacher or a friend who's also performing really well, or just another classmate. And if you have that tutor, going through it again, getting great understanding, because that's your foundation for every task that comes with it. As soon as you understand those 2 parts, the criteria and the rubric, everything just flows.
So in other words, don't ignore it, because I find it's so easy to, you know, you get in, your teachers are always in, often the first couple of weeks, they go through the rubric, it's easy to zone out, you know, because it's got all these big words often, you know, and you're like, yeah, whatever, just let me read the, you know, like watch the movie, read the text, whatever it is. And so it's actually paying attention to that proves to be really critical. So there are a couple of new assessment types that sort of started to come through. I mean, there's, you know, Mod C, first of all, as well, which you're laughing, which you know, it says a lot. I'd love to get, what advice or tips would you have for students in grappling with Mod C? Because obviously, you know, you've got persuasive, discursive, imaginative potentially that you're expected to write. You know, you're responding to often, you know, an unseen stimulus for it. You've got a reflection statement maybe that you have to do. It's fairly anxiety-inducing, I feel.
Definitely.
So what tips or advice would you have for students navigating Module C?
Yeah, it's funny because I always used to say to my teachers, I'm allergic to Mod C because I'm allergic to creative writing. I hate it. I didn't touch it. I refused to look at it. I was just, because I don't read fiction that much either, and I was like, I'm not doing it. So it was an anxiety part going, it's coming up. It's really coming up. I think it's being able to exit your comfort zone and starting really engaging with it, because I was embarrassed of my creative writing because I wasn't that great at it, and I would sometimes refuse to write it because I just didn't like what I was putting on the page. But it was being able to go, look, I prioritize and I prefer to get my goal and get out of my comfort zone than just sit there and not do it. So it's taking that step to really engage with what you were doing. And then it was a matter of submitting responses as frequently as I could. I would like to say to my teachers, look, I want to get 2 responses to you this week. I'll do it at my own time as my own practice. And can I get my, like, just some feedback on it and increase that feedback loop throughout it, and it would be saying like persuasive and discursive. It was getting the clarity on what that actually looks like first. And then how I kind of did it was I'd start just planning structures to persuasive and discursive. So I'd get like a sample question and be like, okay, now I have an idea of what discursive looks like. Let's just do like a skeleton structure. What my point would be, my examples would be just very brief. And once I got comfortable with that, okay, now let's start doing a full response. Okay, and I always used to type them at the beginning, and then, because I could then change things quicker, but then I kind of got into the flow of handwrite them out and under like a test sort of condition. But that was the stage of doing it. Really exit that comfort zone, decide you are going to engage with it, because you're more than likely going to have to do it. You're going to have to do one of those styles of writing. It's inevitable that you're going to have to do it.
And so you didn't hedge your bets, what I'm hearing as well, right? I just want to clarify that.
Yeah.
It wasn't where you went, all right, I'm just going to hope that I get a discursive and I'm just going to nail discursive and that's it, right? Like you went and you worked on all three of the potential, types of responses you had to provide.
Yeah, definitely. And it was, persuasive was the one that, and discursive, I kept thinking, I don't know the difference on these. And at first I thought, okay, what if I just bank on one of them and hope? And I looked at it and I was like, that's not going to work. You don't want to sit with the anxiety of hedging your bets either. You don't want to sit there going, I pray that this is going to be the question I want, and then reading time, quickly flick through, look at mod C and hope it's there, because if it's not, then you're just going to sit with that anxiety for your whole exam. So you don't hedge on it. Really, even if you can't do fully each one of them, say you just focus, you hone in on creative, which means there's less time on the other two, that's still better than just disregarding the other two. So try and obviously get as much of them as you can, but if you can't, still engage with them.
Yeah, that's right. So don't ignore any of them.
Exactly.
But you may end up potentially having one that you're just stronger at anyway, and you're doing a little bit more. So just to recap, what I'm hearing is a process with one. I mean, you did the work. I think that's important to highlight. Like a band 6 just doesn't. You don't just shake that out. And it happens. Like you were for mod C particularly, like working on understanding what the tech, what it was, what a persuasive required, what an imaginative required. You were then writing scaffolds, essentially. Then you were writing full-blown responses. You were getting feedback on these. So you had a tight feedback loop. And then you were doing them in exam conditions on top of that, which is fantastic. Now, did you memorize anything for any of Mod C at all? Or was it all just like developing your writing capabilities so that you could do it in time conditions?
Yeah, there was very minimal memory involved. The way the memory came in was, we did like a Mod C in school task, an in-school assessment task. And then when I was practicing for the HSC, I remember I wrote about certain things. I thought, okay, I could really work on that. I could really enhance that. Let's try and transfer it and build up on it. So it wasn't like memorizing a word-for-word response. It was memorizing ideas and then practicing them. And it wasn't a matter of, okay, I'm going to write about these 100%, whatever the question is going to come up. But it was more just going, okay, because I've done X amount of responses, I remember talking about this idea or that character or that setting and transfer it over. Same with...
It was almost having a library of things you could pull from, right? Exactly. And then you were like remixing based on what you were seeing in front of you, essentially.
That comes with practice of twisting things, about going, all right, I'm going to give myself 5 minutes. Let's look at this question. Let's see if I can adapt something. You can build a bit of a skill to it, but then you don't want to get into that trap of, I'm only going to write about something I've already written about. That's the danger of doing that kind of strategy of using like your bank of ideas. But I still feel like you need some sort of bank to go in with. You don't want to be sitting there trying to think of something on the spot when the clock's ticking. Still fine to have those ideas, but just don't memorize them word for word, like big responses. It doesn't work.
Cool. And so that's the Mod C component. Now the other, I think, particularly sort of anxiety-inducing part is also the unseen text component. Because again, these are parts that you don't know what you're going to get. Like you walk in and you look at it and you're like, uh-oh. So how did you prepare for that? Given that you would walk in, you would get a range of unseen text on text and human experience and then be expected to, respond to some questions in a sophisticated way in exam conditions.
It was practice, as most things are, but it was looking at, okay, if it was like a 5 marker or something, and it was not an image, it was a text that you've got to read, which tends to, I think, have with those longer responses. And it was the directive term at the start. It was really understanding what that looks like, because in my trials, I sped through short answers because I did so much in the essay. I looked at these and then my teachers would say, you left very little time. I think I left like 25 minutes. I got them done and it still ended up being okay, but it could have been much better. And my teachers would say, with your limited time, you wrote way too much on that. You should have transferred that over to that and you would have gotten that extra mark for it. because I didn't understand in a short answer what the evaluate would mean or just the outline. It was understanding what it looks like, because then if you see the outline, you go, okay, I know that means X amount of examples, very minimal analysis, sweet, no, that looks like a bit of a checklist again. If I get to the big response, it's like, okay, I know that this means, as a rule of thumb, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 examples, analyze them, link them back, things like that. So it was being able to look at that directive and then being able to interpret what it meant and what it looks like. And then with the images, that's a whole other set of techniques. That's its own thing. It was essentially coming down to memorizing, then learning them. So you could look at an image and go, bang, I know what that is. And that came in practice again, just looking at certain images in past papers, whatever, and going, yep, I know that technique. Okay, I know that one. And you pick up ones along the way too. You might be like, I feel like that has to be a technique. That looks like something. What is it? And you would ask someone, they're like, oh, that's that. And you're like, sweet, got another one down. So it was like that. It was the exposure to them constantly, and then just practice.
Were you getting a feedback loop on these as well, in terms of you were writing, you were getting a past paper, modifying it, because obviously, again, there were, not many floating around that were texting human experience.
Yeah.
Were you getting feedback on it to go, yeah, okay, great, yeah, you're hitting the things during practice?
There was the feedback to it, probably not as frequent as I wish. I was more proactive with the other ones, like the other modules. These I still looked at, but I might have been, especially leading up to trials and HSC, I might have been like to my teacher, look, can I give you one every 2 or 3 days that looks like this? And then they would give it back, and I'm like, okay, sweet, I'll try another one, look at it like that. One great thing our teachers did too was post-trials, was we spent a few weeks doing it, is going through all the modules, working on certain things. When we got to short answer, they would talk about what a certain thing looks like, what does an outline question look like, and you'd start realising what they actually are. That was a really different sort of feedback loop, because although they weren't looking at your own work, you could look at yours and see what they're saying and go, oh God, I'm missing that. Oh, okay, that's where those 2 marks went, or something like that. Next time I get a similar question, remember to put those things in. So it was feedback, but not that kind of direct one. So there was a couple of different styles, but it was still evidently there.
And then the essays, right? Now let's talk about the essays, the final component, which is, what, 3/5 of your final HSC exam for English. How did you approach those? And I think one of the things that really emerged was, in the old syllabus for English, particularly for many years, it got to a point where students were essentially just, rote memorizing essays. And so the new syllabus in part was designed to make it a little more challenging for that. And I know, the first year of the new syllabus, the year prior, there were a couple of curlies in there that definitely indicated that. What was your approach? Did you memorize essays, or did you do something else instead?
I didn't memorize them. I just knew, I thought I don't want to get into that trap. A lot of people deter against it, and I understood why. But I'm not going to memorize it. It was back to, and this initially my teachers suggested against it, but when I was working with Agapi, we stuck to our guns of like, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. But it's what we would do is for each module, I'd get some pretty good concepts. So if it was like Billy Elliot, I'd be like, all right, when I get a Billy Elliot essay, I have these 3 concepts that I know I can tailor to any question. And then mod A, mod B, I would have anywhere between 3 and 5 concepts that I know, they're not like very specific, they're general, so they can be manipulated and twisted to the question. And I would know those really well. And then it came down to, let's practice actually twisting them to the question. At the start, it was difficult.
When you say concepts, just to clarify for a moment, I'm assuming it's, a broad brushstroke. So, maybe, in Billy Elliot, almost maybe another word to think of it might be like a broad theme or idea, right? Yeah. But you kept it broad. And then I'm assuming underneath that you had, what, 5, 7, 8 examples that you could use depending on what way you decided to twist, adapt the idea. And then what you were saying you're doing is then you practiced. So what did that practice then look like in terms of?
Yeah, so once I knew the concept or the theme, so for example, when I was doing mod B, one of my themes to Elliot was disillusionment of life and like degradation of the human psyche and things like that. There were certain like topics or themes or concepts, things like that. And then under everything, I would have my examples, I would know them. And then kind of obviously like the technique, a general analysis, why that example is actually important, and a couple of techniques. Like Garp would always say, have at least 2 techniques, so you'd know them. And then it would be, get a question, and now let's plan this out, all right? Let's look at this question and go, okay, how can I change my concepts? I have a bank of them. Out of the 5, let's say, which 3 or 4 am I going to use? and how can they be manipulated. And it was constant practice of doing it. It was a lot of them. It took quite a bit of time to get your mind thinking in that way, to twist things. And then after you do enough of them, you start to realize that you've pretty much covered for every variation of question. There's only so many questions they can ask because it all evolves around the same idea of the module. That's why it's so important to know the rubric and the criteria, because it all evolves around it. So once you've done enough questions, you can start to go, I know how to twist really anything here. And then you just get a flow on with it. And then every now and again, I'd go, okay, let's do our full essay. Let's fully write it out. That I might be like once or twice a week, tops, writing it out. It was also like time constraints and things like that. But I'd go, now that I've actually done a scaffold to a random question I haven't seen, let's write it out, get the practice going, and just keep repeating that process over and over again.
Yeah, okay. Well, so again, like hard work is what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, there's no shortcuts really as well.
No.
It's, you know, taking the questions, doing the practice, so that, you know, and I guess the key thing is it meant that when you were in the exam, you'd already done that so many times before, where you'd seen a question, you had to adapt what you had. You know, you weren't just picking the same two concepts, cookie cutter, putting them in. You had a range, so that you could really create something that critically, which I know was your big piece of feedback, actually answered the question.
And the beauty of doing the plans over and over again is when you get into the exam, you have such great familiarity on how to do plans and how to streamline them. So you're not sitting there for the first time ever spending 10 minutes on what is this plan going to look like? Should I be writing out all my quotes, all my analysis? Because you've done so many, you eventually just go, okay, I had like trigger words. If it was a certain concept, I'd be like a certain word for a scene. And it made, I could 2 or 3 minutes, plans done, and you've got more time to focus on how you're going to critically write it and answer the question, rather than consuming all this time planning. So that's a side benefit to practicing scaffolds.
You get better exam technique ultimately, which is awesome. So then, final question, you know, what sort of advice that you haven't already shared that you might give to you know, a HSC student who's grappling with advanced English and helping them, you know, break through the Band 6 wall?
Yeah. I think it's at the beginning of someone's, like, if you're almost there, it comes down to seeking the feedback on it and asking, what are you missing? Big time, because if you keep repeating the same process, it's not going to get bumped up. Getting those Band 6s is tough. It's its own style of writing. So it's then seeing what can I work on, and then exemplars. I loved sample responses. Like any examples I get my hand on, I wanted to read them to see what someone else had and what my work should essentially look like. So if you can keep seeking out other people, whether it's your tutor, your teacher, your friends, whoever. Like some of my HSC teachers were fantastic at English, and I'd even be like, can you just give this a read? just to see how it sounds. Is that all right? And they'd be like, yeah, sure, and come over. And then they're going to get help like that. So it's seeking out as many people as you can to help you with your work, because that's what's going to, the difference between like an 89 and 90 is tough to kind of get. That's 1 mark. It's quite tough to get to it. And there's certain things that are required. So it's getting people to identify them for you is then going to push you up. And then once you know what you're missing, you go, all right, sweet, I've now just got to build on what I've got. Like I've now got that one missing element, I've just hit it, now let's try and like blow it out of the water. So once you hit that 90, you then just work up. So that'd be my biggest piece of advice.